Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Debbie Hart, the President and CEO of BioNJ, the Life Sciences Trade Association in New Jersey. I'd like to welcome you and thank you all for joining us for a really important conversation on demystifying AI, featuring thought leaders from academia, law, and technology to share their valuable insights and experiences. We know we have some interesting conversation about to happen. So today's webinar will go until about 1:30. It does qualify for CLE credit. And of course, as you know, if you've done CLE credit before, you do need to stay on for the full entire program to qualify for the credit. And of course, we encourage you to do that. Before we begin, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to our outstanding planning committee, co-chaired by Sheetal Patel from J&J and Mark Gatos from Moderna, for thoughtfully shaping today's discussion. And I would like to hand it over to my colleague to go over some logistics and, more importantly, to introduce our panel, Dr. Ian McLaughlin, the Vice President of Government Affairs at BioNJ. So Ian, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Debbie, and good afternoon, everybody. We are delighted to have so many of you with us today for what promises to be an insightful discussion. Our esteemed panel of experts has a great deal to share over the next hour and a half, and they've reserved time at the end of the session to address your questions. And so throughout the program, please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box. Given the fairly large number of participants joining us today, we may not be able to address every question live, but rest assured, we will follow up with any unanswered inquiries after the program concludes. And just FYI, the webinar is being recorded. And so as a reminder, while our speakers will be providing valuable insights, please note that their remarks should not be considered legal advice. And so to set the stage and lead our discussion, please welcome partner at King & Spalding, Lisa Dwyer. Lisa, welcome. The floor is yours.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Ian. As Ian said, my name is Lisa Dwyer. I'm a partner at King & Spalding. I've been practicing food and drug law now for about 25 years. And just prior to joining the firm 10 years ago, I worked directly for the commissioner at FDA. I am delighted to be joined by a group of panelists with very diverse expertise. I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Adam is my partner at King & Spalding. Adam, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Hi, my name is Adam Solander. Like Lisa said, I'm a partner at King & Spalding, and I sit in the Data Privacy and Security Group. Have been focused really on this intersection between technology and life sciences for about 15 years, and have really been working in the AI space for about a decade. So really looking forward to this conversation, and it really is a great panel. So thank you guys for being a part of it.
Great, terrific. Rachel, how about you next?
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining. Like they said, my name is Rachel Bader-Kiefer. I'm the Vice President of Compliance at Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals. I have been in compliance for about 20 years, half in pharma, half in non, all of it in the operations space, and really excited to share my experiences with all of you and how I have brought AI into the operations world for healthcare compliance.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. Jake, you're next on my screen. Do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you. And thank you so much to everyone for having me. Looking forward to this discussion. I'm a professor at Seton Hall Law School and faculty director of our Center for Health and Pharmaceutical Law. I teach classes in data analytics and in healthcare fraud, as well as serve as the faculty advisor for our healthcare compliance programs around the globe. Before coming to Seton Hall 6 years ago, I was with the Department of Justice for 11 years, where I was the chief of the healthcare fraud unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. Thank you again, everyone, for having me.
Great, fantastic. And last but not least, Jeremy.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. Jeremy Osinski, good afternoon. Principal with EY's Forensic and Integrity Services Practice. Thank you all for joining. Thank you very much to BioNJ for hosting. My background is as a technologist. I sit within our forensics business. My focus is in forensic data analytics, both in terms of assisting clients from an investigations perspective, as well as helping our clients harness leading and emerging technologies to better their legal compliance and internal audit processes. And very much looking forward to the discussion this afternoon.
Great, thank you. So the title of our presentation today involves the concept of demystifying AI. And I think everyone, of course, knows what AI is. I'm sure that we've all been playing with Chat GPT for at least a few months now. But we thought it would be important to just level set on definitions right at the top. So I wanted to ask the panelists, what is AI? And if you don't mind, I think I'll start with Adam for that.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And I do think this is a really important question. I think one of the things that's going to be clear today, among all of this new jargon and technologies and risk areas, is that AI does suffer from a definitional issue, which really I think is causing problems, both from implementing these technologies as well as diligencing business partners and vendors and understanding, where these technologies fit in. At the end of the day, I mean, AI is a really broad term, and it refers to kind of any computerized tool that can reason, learn, analyze, much, the way humans do, much the way we think is what it's been trying to mimic. One of the important definitional issues that I think that we need to wrap our heads around is that this is not new technology. I mean, this technology has been around for a long time. If you remember, like 12 years ago, IBM Watson went into the healthcare space. They were using AI to analyze skin lesions. So really what we try to do here is just think of this as the next step in the development, software development evolution. And the reason that this is getting so much hype, the reason that this is getting so much press and every company is really worried about it is that these technologies, while not necessarily new, are much more accessible. These used to be things that, clients would spend millions and millions and millions of dollars developing. Now you can download it for free. So there is a lot more accessibility with these technologies that is causing the issues. That's not to say that there aren't new, technologies and new advances being made in AI. I think the most important one that you're probably hearing almost every day is generative AI. So the way older AI tools worked, a decade ago, it was big databases that were essentially relational databases that companies would code to make predictions, to automatically make predictions based on huge data sets. I think when I think of AI and I think of what's new in this market and what's raising the temperature in the life sciences industry, it really is that generative layer, that layer where, software development now can create wholly new content based on the data corpus and the data that it's trained on. So to me, that's really what the new thing is. But at the end of the day, AI really is just the next step in the software development evolution. And it's nothing to be scared of. We just have to understand what type of AI we're implementing and make sure that we're defining it and developing processes that appropriately account for those technologies. I know Jeremy has some stuff to say about this as well.
Yeah, no, that's well said, Adam. And particularly when we look and think about AI, right? We've really been on this journey now for, I would argue, the better part of 70 or 80 years, right? Really as an industry, right, as a profession. Where, when you think first about the rise of AI, right, that technology began to, believe it or not, appear in the 1940s, right? That field of essentially computer science that allowed us to create intelligent machines, right? The next subset there, right? So think about sort of a timeline, right? The next stop on that journey was in the 1960s, right? In terms of the advancement of machine learning, right? Where at that point, computers for the first time were being taught to essentially imitate or mimic intelligent human behavior. So starting to move away from sort of binary if-then type of tasks into being able to essentially mimic how we would think. The third stop on that journey is essentially, deep learning, right? In the last maybe 20 years or so. And so when you think about sort of speech to text or image recognition, right? That ability to really to simulate a neural network, right? To simulate the advanced type of processing we as human beings, right? Conduct within our brains, right? Machines have, again, been able to emulate that. The fourth stop in that journey, right, is where we are today in terms of the rise of generative AI, right? And so what's new there, right? It's the ability to generate, to create new content, be that text, images, audio, and video, based on the data which the model has been been trained on, and essentially really unlocking the power of what are known as really transformer type neural networks, right? So really advanced processing capability and processing power. I'll touch briefly as well on what I'd say is maybe stop 4.5 on the journey, which essentially is the rise of agentic AI. Which particularly has been a very hot topic, I'd say within recent weeks here. Effectively, agentic AI represents the next frontier in automation, where what we're starting to see now is generative AI paired with some of the process automation, the RPA type of capabilities we saw the rise of in recent years, to essentially enable not only the generation of content, but the actual application of reasosoning and the execution of specific type of tasks, right? As of just a very brief non-scientific example here, right? A generative AI model, let's say if I'm planning a 3-day summer vacation, right, somewhere, I might ask a generative AI enabled agent to provide recommendations to me, right, on where to stay and dining accommodations and so on, right? The next step in that journey essentially is agentic AI, where essentially I can now deploy an agent not only to provide those recommendations, but also to say, hey, go ahead and book the hotels and flights and dining, and include my preferences, and seat me on the plane where I prefer, and so on and so forth. So again, we're simply scratching the surface here, but it has been an exciting journey. But I think it's important to note, as Adam indicated, this is essentially just that next stop on what's been really a decades-long journey here around the rise of AI and bringing it to the business community.
Great. Thanks, Jeremy. Fascinating examples. I think we look forward to full implementation there. I'd love to be able to just, talk to a computer and be able to plan an entire trip. Before we move on, I've got a question for Jake, but before we move on, Adam, you said something that I'm curious about. You said that definitions are really important from a diligencing perspective. So I assume that what you're thinking about there is, if a company is looking to purchase another, or if a PE company is interested in investing. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even in, lesser degrees of vendor management and contract management, one of the issues that we've seen all the time is people aren't understanding sort of the AI technologies that are being deployed. And they're looking at it not from a precise lens, but from this broad definitional term of, AI can be all these different things. We need to, essentially boil the ocean in these diligences, whether it's vendors or whether or not it is looking to acquire a company. So that's a big problem with not understanding the different types of AI that Jeremy just went over, understanding what the capabilities are, understanding what the data rights are. And that's causing a lot of problems. And, it's one of those things that I hope people on this call will say, all right, this is nothing new. This is the next step in the development process. We need to understand that AI is going to be pervasive in every diligent or every contract that we are diligencing, every company we're looking to buy. It'll be throughout, and making sure that they're appropriately categorizing the different technologies the same way they would do with standard data development, and making sure that they're applying the right lens and filter to it. There's nothing magic here. It's really just making sure that we break down what the technologies are, what the purpose of these technologies are, and making sure that we're looking at them appropriately, and not just saying, hey, this is AI, this is something we can't use. Because at the end of the day, everything that you're doing, anything that involves software, now involves AI.
Great. So just to summarize that, basically it's just important to understand which tools the target company is deploying, and to assess risk around those. So to Jeremy's example, the agentic tools would be the highest level of risk, and you want to make sure that there's an appropriate structure in place to make sure that those risks are being mitigated.
Absolutely. know what you're buying, know what you're contracting for. And that's really why the definitional issue is so important.
Great, fantastic. So we're going to bring our academic in here now. Jake, I think, after listening to Jeremy and Adam, the biggest question in my mind is how do you distinguish AI from more traditional data analytics? I'm hoping that you can help us better understand that from kind of an academic perspective.
Sure. Thank you, Lisa. And I do think it's helpful to kind of take a step back and talk even more broadly before we get back to focusing in on AI. And Adam talked about AI being a broader term, and it is. I'll go even broader and talk about data analytics, and important to note that AI, we're really talking about a subset of data analytics, and that we're using data, but here in a different way, where there is a level of really thinking and thinking by the machine that is different than when we're just talking about basic data analytics. So I want to take a step back. When we think about data analytics at the basic level, we're talking about the science of examining raw data with the purpose of drawing conclusions about that information. And that doesn't have to be anything incredibly complicated or dramatic. We watch a baseball game and we realize that a team has looked at a batter's history and noticed that they hit more balls to right field than to left field, and so the fielders shift over. That's data analytics. That's not AI, right? That's analyzing data. And it's important to just note that data analytics that's not AI hasn't gone away, because we recognize, as we were talking in preparation for this call, recognition that different companies are in different places when it comes to developing their AI programs and even developing data analytics capabilities. And individuals on this call, we expect, are in different places as well. And AI does raise additional unique issues, additional challenges, and additional opportunities. And so that's really going to be our focus here now. But it is not just a wholesale replacement. Things that aren't AI aren't going away. When we talk about things like a basic outlier analysis and looking for red flags, looking through data to identify where there are outliers, where you're going to say, look, we've got this outlier, this thing that jumps out at us. We should go dig in and find out where that's coming from. Some of that may now be able to happen automatically through AI, but not all of it necessarily will, and that's okay as well. So important for folks to be working on their understanding more broadly, even while focusing in on the unique issues associated with AI.
Great. Thank you, Jake. I want to shift now that we've kind of set the playing field and defined AI. I want to shift to talk a little bit more about how pharma companies have begun deploying AI tools. Rachel, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. We'd love to just better understand Mallinckrodt's journey here, the types of tools that you've launched and insights that you have from the process.
Sure, absolutely. So we started off small and took off small bites and progressed into expanding, excuse me, what we've been doing. We started off with HCP meal expense monitoring from what are any employee that was permitted to have a meal with an HCP, and started with that. And then we expanded that to email monitoring. And then we took it the next step and we implemented a chatbot last year that sits on our Teams platform, where we loaded all of our healthcare compliance related policies, procedures, training, FAQs, and programmed it to answer healthcare compliance related questions. So that way, folks in the field or in home office, if they had a quick question, they didn't have to wait for a human being to get back to them. They could get a quick answer back to them, and then they could proceed upon their day.
That's great. So 3 different examples right there. So the first tool that you launched related to vetting meals for healthcare professionals, for HCPs. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, maybe how you developed it and who initially piloted it and whether it's been successful. Do you feel like it's more useful than humans themselves keeping track of those types of expenditures?
Yeah, sure. I do think it's much more useful than a human, because if you think about it, there's a lot of transfers of value from an HCP meal expense perspective. It's part of the daily role of your sales professional, and then your market access professional, even from the medical side, if they're meeting with a KOL to talk about a paper. So it is really very much part of the fabric of what we do, but we also want to make sure that it is done compliantly. So how do you do that and look at the thousands of transactions and make sure that what you're looking at is from a value-added perspective? And that's where the AI came into place. Did we really care about the rep that went over by 2 cents? No, we don't care about the rep that goes over by 2 cents. So we needed to employ this technology to look at it from a risk-based methodology. And that's how we utilize the AI. And so it's overall been successful. We're looking at from, are you over by a certain percent? How frequently do you go over? Because if you have 50 transactions in a month and you've gone over one time by 10%, is that something that we really want to spend our time and resources on versus somebody who has the same amount of transactions and has gone over many more times and by the same percentage? So we employ the AI to help us look at those things and really help us drive where we are focused.
That's great. So it sounds like there's a human in a loop on that one. And that seems to be something that we've kind of observed from our perch at KNS, that as pharma companies are beginning to deploy these tools for different purposes, they're sure to keep the human in the loop. Can you talk a little bit more about the second one that you were talking about? You said vetting emails. What are you vetting the emails for? Is that a similar kind of meal compliance, or what's the objective there?
So here is a general review, to be honest, and this is the one that I would say took even longer to review. And I'll say, you said something very important about keeping the human element in it. It's, for me, AI and any technology is a trust but verify. We are not going to give an employee a coaching, a written warning, or any type of disciplinary action until we've reviewed ourselves. So I will say that I think that is critically important, that you have to trust but verify. And so moving into the email piece, it is a broader look to ensure that we are communicating compliantly. Is what a sales rep is communicating, has it been approved by PRC? Are they permitted to communicate that? Are we communicating something that is personal information or personal health information that we shouldn't be communicating? Are we talking, we're looking for statements related to alcohol. So it's statement-based, but it's also combinations of statements. We're looking about who's making the statement. And so there's a lot of different factors that go into place when you're looking at it. And then we review it in a dashboard. And that's part of where the generative AI comes in, is where it might have picked up all the flags. So for example, a sales rep is attaching a PRC approved speaker program invitation. It initially is picked up by the AI because it's external. It talks about our product. It's talking about indications. It's things that have been PRC approved, but the AI didn't know that off the bat. We had to teach it what was PRC approved, what wasn't PRC approved, and what could be sent. And so that was the generative aspect of it, where it had to be programmed, where now it is not picking up PRC approved invitations, and it's filtering those out and only getting flagged what is not PRC approved. So that's the generative aspect of it. And it is proven to be very helpful in coaching our folks on what's appropriate in email and what's not.
That is absolutely incredible. I think about, as lawyers, we sometimes get called in to do internal investigations to look under the hood and make sure that emails are compliant, but you guys are really looking under the hood and in real time. I'm going to jump for a second here. Adam, can I put you on the spot and ask you about privacy issues here? I know that you are, one of your focuses is privacy.
Yeah, I mean, from an internal employee perspective, anything they're putting on the system is absolutely fair game. So that to me seems like a really good application of AI where AI can do what it would take, current technology and individuals a lot longer to do. So from a privacy perspective, I don't see a problem with it, assuming they have the appropriate consents in place and, generally anything that's being done on company systems is free to monitor. So I don't have any issue with that whatsoever.
Great, fantastic. Rachel, can I put you back on the spot? You talked a little bit about having a chat bot with regard
Sure.
to the SOPs and firm policies. I'd love to better understand that too. Is that for drafting new policies? Is that so your employees can query various policies if they have a question and need a reminder? How does that operationalize?
So that is for searching existing written standards. So policies, procedures, SOPs. You can ask it what the meal limit is for lunch. You can ask who's appropriate to attend an out-of-office meal with an HCP. You can ask it a variety of questions. And then when we launch a new version of a policy, we can actually push messages out from it as well to tell employees that there's a new version out. So for example, we had an update to our global meals, gifts, and entertainment policy. We told employees that there was a new version. We had folks ask, can you tell me what the differences are? And it spit back, here's the key updates to the policy, and let folks know what the key differences were. One thing that we wanted to make sure is that if it didn't know the answer, people got a response. So what happens if it doesn't have an answer, it gets fit back into a private team that only myself and a few others from the compliance team have access to. We review it, and then we direct them where to go find the answer, or we answer it ourselves. We then give that information back to our vendor if it is healthcare compliance related. If it's not healthcare compliance related, we tell people, go ask HR, go ask finance, et cetera. It has been successful, so people are now asking us things that are unrelated to healthcare compliance. So it's a blessing and a curse a little bit, but we're happy that it has been so well received.
That is fantastic. I assume that one of the goals there, one of the objectives was to reduce kind of man and woman hours in terms of responding to those types of questions, and maybe also to improve accuracy. Have you measured the success on either of those fronts?
We haven't. It was more about responsiveness.
Mm-hmm.
There was frustration that we had heard that we were very small. We're a lean and mean compliance team responding to emails from an email box. So it was waiting for an email response, or people didn't know where to go to ask a question. And we needed to make it easier for them. The other thing was we had received feedback that we needed to make our policies more easily accessible for folks out in the field. They're working off of an iPad. And so how do we make it more easily accessible? We had to do some change management because the field wasn't used to using Teams on their iPad. So when we went out and met with them at NSM, we did a little contest, download Teams, message us, you'll be entered into our raffle. So they're downloading Teams, and now they also realize they can also chat with us as a human being, not just the chatbot on Teams, because they're used to texting their manager, they're used to texting their peers, and they said, well, if you just download this app on your phone, you can also similarly text us or chat with the bot and get a very quick answer. So it was more about improving service, I'll say, to our customers out in the field, out into the home office as well, and giving that real-time feedback. And then now we're also able to go in and look at the types of questions that are asked and see if we have an opportunity for training. If there's consistency in a type of question that's being asked, we know that we need to do training on a certain topic. And we can also look and see if it's a certain region, a certain business unit, and focus that training, or if it's broader as well.
That's great. Fantastic. Jeremy, you're a consultant, so you probably have seen a broad array of applications launched. We'd love to get your perspective here too.
Absolutely, Lisa. Yes, and I'll certainly commend Rachel and her team there in terms of some of the chatbot work. We're seeing that to be really one of the most common or best ways to get started. We're seeing that as an approachable way for employees to begin to engage. And I'll say from a return on investment perspective, we encourage many of our clients to just document and detail the number of interactions and so on. From a legal and compliance perspective, it's difficult sometimes to quantify return on investment from a dollars perspective, right? But we've seen, organizations where even the level of engagement with the compliance function has increased substantially through the use of very familiar, intuitive tools such as AI-enabled chatbots. Interestingly, as well, we're starting to see some instances too where the chatbot is starting to take the next step in terms of also serving as an intake mechanism, right? So as opposed to simply engaging in a conversation or pointing the end user to who to contact, the chatbot in some instances now is taking that first step, that second or third step, I'd say, in terms of actually documenting the interaction with that end user and routing that interaction to the appropriate attorney within legal and compliance. And that in and of itself, I'd argue, is a tremendous, certainly time saver in terms of, where do we want our attorney spending time, right? Not necessarily through sort of intake and triage and the like, but rather in terms of being able to really serve as that trusted advisor. So we're seeing some instances of success there as well. I'll also note another good area of low-hanging fruit is we've seen organizations stand up, and these are called different things by different folks, but I'll say broadly sort of just-in-time type of compliance, where think of to Rachel and her example of kind of folks in the field with iPads, think of, very tangible messages being sent to employees based on the circumstances which they find themselves in. So said differently, if you have certain types of sales reps in certain regions, let's say, for example, or who've, where there have been issues historically, or certain types of, say, third-party events where there have been challenges. Yes, it's important to remind your employees of their obligations in terms of policies and so on, but it's also really effective to be able to send them a message day of, to say, hey, Jeremy, we noticed you're heading out to these locations. Here are 6 things to keep in mind, right? And click here for any support or assistance. We've seen that to just be a really nice way of again, continuing to not only drive engagement, but also I'd say, just drive adoption and familiarity in the use of AI.
Great. It's like having an AI chief of staff. I love that. I think I need that. Adam, I'm going to ask you the same question. You're an outside lawyer. You also have a lot of clients. What types of tools are you seeing deployed in the life sciences space?
Yeah, I think I would break it down. So we're seeing, pretty aggressive implementation of AI. And when I think about it, it's really in a couple of areas that AI does a good job at. So when I think about that, it sort of breaks down to like contracting, compliance, and then looking for ways that AI can improve efficiency and productivity. From a compliance perspective, this is probably where we're seeing sort of the most aggressive deployments. We have projects right now trying to trace the origins of counterfeit drugs. AI does a very good job analyzing complex supply chain and, identifying when certain marketers or certain people may be selling counterfeit drugs. We're doing a lot of work in the identifying of non-compliant marketing. One of the really cool things one of our clients has done is they realized that their field people weren't necessarily paying attention to, here's the policy, here's the detailed policy, and, here's how to deal with it. So what they do is they have AI that now creates custom podcasts based on what they're seeing. So if the person is making a statement that may be off-label or is making, a claim that they shouldn't be making, based on their policies and based on what that individual said, it creates a custom, 5-minute podcast going through the way that the company does things and then gives them advice on how to bring those types of statements into compliance, which I thought is really cool. Um, on the contracting, AI is going to revolutionize that. We're seeing a lot of it, sort of pre-negotiation of agreements. So we're seeing tools that negotiate like, smaller contracts like business associate agreements, NDAs, that type of stuff. We're seeing a lot of first cut of vendor agreements based on, what the company has done in similar areas before. Those engines can now, in a lot of ways, redline and put back comments that are in line with what the company has done before. Also, security questionnaires are another place that we've seen a lot of deployment in the life sciences industry, is both in responding to those questionnaires as well as, analyzing the questionnaires that are coming in, creating sort of that second layer of diligence coming back. Where I think in the future, where, we're really seeing, a lot of focus, and I think will really be the next 6 months to a year, is on the efficiency tools. So, everything from, new drug discovery to anywhere you have people and paper heavy processes, that's someplace that AI can really do a good job. So we're seeing a lot of companies sort of going on the hunt for those inefficient processes, understanding where they, may have, workforces that may be in foreign companies that are doing a lot of sort of low level work over and over and over again, identifying how AI might be able to go and step into the shoes of what those individuals are doing, both from a paperwork perspective as well as from, a person perspective. So I really think that that is where, as companies are digging into this, as they're seeing the potential of AI, they're seeing it as a way to increase efficiency all throughout the spectrum.
That's great. I think, Adam, and working with you, we've got a partner, Robert Hooduk, who he and Adam can kind of help accelerate the development of these types of tools. We've been getting a lot of questions in the regulatory space about how we can increase efficiency and reduce man hours. So just kind of to tick off some lists of, inquiries that we've been getting and kind of dreams that I've been dreaming from kind of an FDA regulatory perspective. Making the MLR process, the medical, legal, and regulatory process, more effective, getting questions there, better tracking AEs, adverse events, definitely really important. The Device Center actually last year sent out a note saying that it already had launched an AE tool for better adverse event surveillance, and you got to bet that the Drug Center at FDA is not far behind. Rachel touched upon this, but definitely generating SOPs based on past SOPs. We've already seen chatbots for disease awareness. It makes me a little nervous as an FDA lawyer, but chatbots for ad promo to reduce the number of folks in the sales force, particularly for drugs that are being de-emphasized in a product portfolio or less emphasized. And also seen a lot of rare disease finders. So, one of my catchphrases here is, if you can dream it, like we can build it, which I think is really exciting from my perspective. So when do you dream it? I think, to Adam's point and to Jeremy's point, whenever you need to be more efficient, whenever you're seeing, dollars flow unnecessarily on, human resources, where, for example, where you think that you could just, shrink a workforce and do the same job just as effectively with an AI tool. I'll move on to the next topic. I don't want to run out of time. We've got a lot of great stuff for the panelists. I'm curious as to what you guys are seeing with regard to how these tools are being built. So are they being built in-house? Are they being built by vendors? Rachel, maybe I'll start with you again, because you had 3 great examples. Can you help us better understand how Mallinckrodt, how you guys launched those?
Sure. So we have partnered with an external firm. In our case, this firm specializes solely in life sciences. So we are not explaining to a generalized technology firm about our industry, about the risks, about the laws, about the codes. They have come into this space with a very strong foundation of understanding the laws, the spaces, all of the risks that we are trying to mitigate, and they are coming in with tools and the AI to enhance that mitigation, enhance that risk mitigation. And so that is the approach that we went with. And so when we were doing our RFP and coming in to try and find comparable vendors that offered similar types of AI tools, it was very difficult for us to find something that was comparable, because for us, given what we were trying to do, because where I'm speaking from is very much in the four corners of the healthcare compliance space and not more broadly, it was important for our vendor to understand that, and not that we had to teach them about the risks that we were trying to mitigate. And we wanted them to take on a lot of that particular work for us. So for us, it's very much an outside firm leading the way on it, with a very close partnership with IT, because there is a very strong IT governance structure on our side that we had to take it through from a business case perspective all the way up through approval and prove out the business case, security, et cetera, but completely outside firm.
Mm-hmm. Great, interesting. Jeremy, what are you seeing?
Sure, it's been interesting. We've certainly seen organizations, work with outside firms. There are many certainly in this space. It's also been interesting too. We've seen quite a few organizations embrace the, I'll say, sort of citizen AI developer, right? So interestingly, there are a number of, and they continue to increase in terms of their capacity by the day. A number of these sort of no code or even low code type of platforms that would allow somebody, and of course with the right level of governance, which we'll talk about in a moment here, but allow somebody with a little bit of technical skill and ambition to be able to start to create and test different types of AI algorithms, and whether through sort of Microsoft, Apple, Google, there are a number of, as well as many other smaller tools. We're seeing quite a bit of that, where in fact, some of the best examples have come up, not necessarily through an outside software company or through the IT function, but rather somebody in the business who sort of raised their hand and said, "Hey, let me, run a proof of concept or a pilot in a certain area," and those have in fact really picked up and grown legs and continue to be used today.
That's great. And then, I mean, I think we're seeing the same type of thing. It's the business leaders within the life sciences companies that are dreaming the dream, figuring out the problem that can be solved with the AI tools. So once they do that, are they then turning to their own data scientists? Do you think most pharma companies at this point have their own data scientists to help bring these tools to fruition, or do you think they are relying on outside vendors, or have you seen kind of a combination?
It does depend. Certainly certain organizations are utilizing in-house talent. Others are utilizing outside organizations. But interestingly, there's quite a few instances where, and we did not see too much of this in years past. We see a lot of it now, and frankly, I personally welcome it. More of that hybrid type of way of working, where unlike a traditional IT project where a vendor sort of comes in and requirements are gathered, and then 6 months later something's thrown over the fence. We're seeing much more sort of collaboration with folks in the business, as makes sense, right? I mean, the folks who know business processes best are those in fact in the business, and so sometimes being able to have those folks at the table, augmented and accelerated by an outside firm or an outside software provider, has in fact been very beneficial and just increased, I think, the speed from concept to solution. as well as as well as increase the efficiency and accuracy of the solution too.
Great. So Adam, same question to you that I gave to Jeremy. What are you seeing with the life sciences companies that you're working with? Are they coming up with the ideas themselves, and then are they building them themselves primarily, or are they turning to outside vendors?
I think there is a mix. I think very early on, in sort of, I look at AI, the last 2 years have been sort of an accelerant for AI. And early on in those first 2 years, it was sort of like, hey, we're going to engage a firm, sort of the typical software development process. We're going to have them build this tool for us. So that was really popular in the beginning. And ultimately, I don't think those have been as successful as sort of the collaborative approach that Jeremy is discussing. I think really in about the last year, and it depends on how companies are sort of seeking out these projects. The company knows the problem that they're trying to solve, and they know the data that they have. They know what what they want out of things. That's really hard to hand off to a third party unless you're very involved. So it sounds like Rachel's example, where there was a close collaboration with IT, there was a close collaboration with the decision makers and legal and compliance. All those folks had a seat at the table. We see a lot of that model. We're also seeing a lot of sort of homegrown AI applications where a certain business unit has an issue and they know that they can solve it. And the technology is available. They work with their internal IT department, they work with their data scientists, and they develop that technology. So I think this market is a lot different from the typical software development that we have seen in the past. Those big box software products, we haven't seen as being as effective as when there really is a well documented discrete problem that AI is going to solve, and then there's a close working with the business, whether that utilizes outside software development shops, whether that can be done internally. To me, it's really that integration that's producing successful projects versus things that are failing, and we are seeing stuff fail in the market.
I did a presentation with another team on this topic back in November, and one of the panelists was Chris Siebert from AbbVie. I don't know if he's maybe on today, but I wanted to give him credit for this insight, and it kind of dovetails on what Adam was just saying. He was saying that more and more he thinks the off-the-shelf platforms just aren't fit for purpose. And kind of the future of AI in pharma, particularly big pharma, is that everyone will have their own teams of data scientists to be able to stand up these tools pretty quickly. I mean, obviously, we're not there yet, but that was the future that he was seeing, which I thought was just an interesting comment.
And that's the accessibility of the technology, right? That's something that is new to this market.
Absolutely. So I think that kind of leads us to the next question, which is, how do companies get started? Someone said in the beginning that, we're all kind of in a different place right now. So there are some companies with very sophisticated programs. Rachel, it sounds like you guys, have more than dipped your toe. You've stood up at least 3 different apps. But other companies are just starting to dip their toe into this. So I guess my question is, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do you start piloting the programs, or do you build a governance structure first, or do you kind of build those simultaneously? Rachel, I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of chicken and egg process for Mallinckrodt.
For us, it was a side-by-side approach. We ensured that all the right stakeholders were engaged at the beginning, as Adam mentioned, to ensure that we had buy-in as we were moving, because this was 3 years ago before we really had an AI strategy. So we wanted to ensure that we were following down the right path. So I would say if there really is that urgent need, I would encourage that close collaboration and do it as a simultaneous process and not wait for the governance model to be put into place. I think it is something that you can do hand in hand as long as there's a transparent and open collaborative process. And I would also say, to ensure success, under the old phrase, don't boil the ocean. I would look to solve one particular issue first and start small and keep the perimeter controllable, because you need to really test the efficacy of your AI. And it's much harder to do when you have a giant perimeter with a giant data set and you're trying to solve for multiple problems or answer multiple questions, I should say. And I think that's the biggest piece of advice, because you're going to have to go back in and tweak your programming, tweak what the ask is to ensure that you are getting it right. And in order to do that, from my perspective and from what I've done with these number of projects, starting small, keeping that small perimeter and keeping your data set small is really going to be most beneficial, and expect to have to do it again. I did speak to somebody who wanted to talk to me from a contact perspective to vet a certain vendor, and they were planning on doing 1 quarter's worth of data. That was it. Take it or leave it. That was going to be the success. And I said very politely, I said, I would be honestly, I would save your money. I said, because if you get it right on the first crack, I said, then really, you shouldn't even be going to an outside vendor. You should be writing this yourself and doing it all alone, because I have not spoken to anybody in this space, and I've been on a number of panels before, and I haven't spoken to one person yet that has gotten it right in their first data run, so to speak. So I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. And really identify a very pointed question that you're looking to answer. Because if it's very ambiguous and you're looking to demonstrate success, it's very hard to demonstrate success in an ambiguous solve.
Very interesting. I think we're seeing a lot of the same things in terms of perhaps the best way to put these programs together is just iterative, as you're beginning to stand up different AI functions, growing out the governance process organically as well. And I think really good advice on, asking a very small question so that you can measure success. Adam, I'm going to switch to you first this time, or then I was going to Jeremy first. Adam, what are you seeing in this space in terms of your clients? Are they developing the products first as pilots, or are they developing governance structures first?
So I think all of our clients have some sort of high-level AI governance policy in place that, gives them at least some framework for developing these products. What we're seeing in the market right now is a lot of those broad policies that were put in a couple of years ago. They don't actually do much in terms of a governance policy for the specific products that are being put in. So all those policies sort of have like a committee, and they'll put in procedures as necessary based on the different technologies. So we're seeing that is really where the play is. So, I agree with Rachel. There's no reason to hold off on developing the technologies to wait for governance to be perfect if you can build those in parallel. So we have a very large life sciences client that had a very aggressive chief technology officer, and a few years ago said, hey, we want to explore everywhere that we can use AI. And one of the things that happened immediately when sort of that proclamation came out is every single division, every single employee had a use of AI that they wanted. And there was no way that the company with both their internal IT and development resources could do that. So the approach that they sort of came up with was they created a policy of sort of a use policy for AI in a committee to approve different projects. And essentially the way they're doing it is the process that Rachel went through. They have to define, one of several areas where, it's a goal of the AI mission of the company to improve, efficiency, reduce costs, be more accurate, improve quality. There's different categories that they can do that. They lay out the problem and how it's solvable. And then the committee with, some outside consultants looks at the different applications and determines, hey, is this a good use of AI, or is this something that's going to be boiling the ocean that we don't have data to actually prove out, or something that we shouldn't be spending resources on? So they take a very granular and detailed approach to how they're implementing the problems that they're looking to solve, and ultimately where they want AI to strategically fit within the organization. And it's a very smart way to do essentially what Rachel has done in her company. So that's really what we're seeing is if you are asking it big questions and you're taking a very broad hack at this, it's not going to be successful. We have some clients that are about to enter into litigation on development projects where, the different milestones weren't well defined. They didn't really know what they were going to do. They just wanted to be able to tell the market that they had implemented AI. And now a lot of those, development agreements are going to end in litigation because they weren't well defined and there wasn't a way to actually meet the goal that they wanted it to meet.
Jeremy, I'm going to ask you the same question. You have a broad client base as well. What are you seeing?
Absolutely, Lisa. Yes, it's very much that sort of think big, start small, scale fast type of mantra that really serves organizations well in this space, right? And just even looking at some of the questions coming into the chat here, there are folks at different types of, companies of different sizes and so on. Those AI-enabled use cases can and should differ, right? What's important is being able to prioritize, again, where to get started, right? And it should not necessarily be dozens and dozens of initiatives, in parallel, right? But rather picking whatever number makes sense based on the capacity of the organization. And typically what we've seen some clients do is almost envision a scatter plot, if you will, right? Where you're kind of putting all your ideas on a whiteboard on paper, and then you're essentially ranking them. One axis of the scatter plot might be essentially the value, right? The impact. And then the other would be, if you will, the cost slash deployment time slash resourcing, and et cetera, right? And the key is identifying really that sweet spot of what are those initiatives that can drive a high level of value that we can also get up and running relatively quickly, particularly with a technology where there is some skepticism out there, right? It is important to be able to show that those early returns, right, and be able to build that level of confidence. And so for those reasons, right, we always encourage folks to find, again, those impactful type of use cases, but also the ones that can be implemented relatively quickly, right? So what we steer clients away from doing is, necessarily picking those use cases that maybe the underlying data, right, isn't necessarily of the best quality or isn't known, right? Or, we'll say, look, it may not be the best use of resources to go out and try to blend data from 10 different SAP instances, right? That will take a long time, right? What may make a lot more sense, for example, is back to the chatbot examples, right? Where yes, there may be a very high impact there in terms of the number of employees you can reach, and to actually get many of those models up and running. In some cases, takes days or weeks, right? We're not having to deal with terabytes of data. We're loading in policies and so on. And yes, there's massaging and finessing that goes on. But that's really the type of exercise that we encourage folks to undertake. And then as it relates to sort of, is it the chicken or the egg? I'd say, to echo Rachel's point and Adam's point, it's both, right? They really should operate in parallel. Because we too have seen, we've seen or come across instances as well where a well-intentioned AI development project without the right guardrails either's ended in a not great place from a litigation perspective, or just a major sort of cost write-off where a bunch of hands went on keyboards and algorithms were being created without the right guardrails in place, or an understanding of what the guardrail the guardrails governance processes should be around those.
I think my takeaway here from all three of you is that it's always going to be a learning process. So not just in terms of kind of launching first gen, second gen, third gen, versions of the tool, but perhaps thinking about launching first gen, second gen, third gen versions of the governance structure. Adam, I saw that you just went off mute. Did you have anything additional, or?
No, mostly just agreeing with you.
Or was it just active agreement?
Listen, I agree as well.
I feel very strongly about what you just said, and I agree super strongly. But no, I think you're right. And, legal, compliance, IT, data science, they need to follow these algorithms. They're not just something that you develop and then they sit there and they do their function. That governance needs to ride with the algorithm as long as it's deployed. And, that's another thing where you're sort of marrying this. It's not something that you can turn on and walk away from. That governance is persistent and needs to stay there and until you divorce it and take it down. So there is a commitment there that I think some companies necessarily don't understand. That the governance needs to be in depth, and it's not a one-time thing. There's going to be a limit to how much AI companies can deploy because of the resources needed to oversee it.
Great,
Yeah, and it's
great.
governance and it's maintenance as well. It's the governance model, but it's maintaining what you're using and making sure that what you're getting out of it is still valuable and iterating it along the way, because we want to ensure that you're still, I'll say, getting the bang for the buck, the question's still being answered, and maybe your question is evolving over time. You need to enhance or change your inputs to ensure your output is changing over time, because your business changes, your risks are changing, and you're going to, in order to continue to have that AI tool be valuable in an organization or as a function, you have to keep examining what your input is to ensure your output is still valuable. So just as your governance model needs to keep evolving, so does your input to make sure your output is still valuable. So everything that we have put into place, there are folks on my team that are working with it on a weekly basis and monitoring it and looking at it, and to make sure that we're not getting hallucinations, that we're not putting inaccurate information out into the ethosphere, and that what we're getting back into our organization is valuable and quality information that we can then use to mitigate risk within our organization. So while it adds a lot of value and adds strength to your program, it's also not something that is a plug and play that you can just walk away from and expect it to continue operating in a well-functioned manner.
I think
there's substantial risk, right, in walking away and not having that process in place. That process should be continual and intrinsic. For instance, if one's, say, utilizing AI to look at payments data, right, say HCP payments data, right, are those algorithms being updated for policy changes or for the inflationary environment, right? If one, for example, on the other hand, is, say, looking at algorithms that look at employees, right, and employee activity, are those being updated as well as the business evolves, right? Do those take into account, right, the continued rise in gig workers and remote work and so on and so forth? So absolutely echo your points, Rachel, on not letting those algorithms grow stale and having a process in place to continue to update them.
You're both perfectly teeing up my next question. And this is the money question. This was very important to BioNJ, so I wanted to make sure we spend some time on it. How do you budget for all this? How do you do short-term and long-term budgeting? And I think what I'm hearing is long-term budgeting in terms of, there's a need for continued assessment once you launch these tools. Rachel, sorry to do this. I'm going to start with you again, just because you have kind of the boots on the ground company experience. How did you go through the budgeting process?
So for my team, I'm in I'll say a fortunate spot because I'm the operations team. So I have folks that we built it into part of their role. And so their role is adapted into monitoring it from the daily perspective. From a tool perspective, we started looking to figure out, what is this going to cost? And thankfully, from a tool perspective and a maintenance perspective, it's very predictive year over year, and thinking about what you need to do from an initial investment perspective versus maintaining it on a year over year perspective, just like you would any other IT project, to be honest. And then thinking about an IT project that you would need to maintain, and really talking to either A, your vendor, or B, your internal stakeholders on what that maintenance cost looks like. That if you plan on changing 10 to 25% of your algorithms year over year, what does that cost look like on a year-over-year basis, given that estimation, and then budgeting for that going forward. So I think some people get a little bit paralyzed in the budgeting process because AI itself is new and therefore it seems paralyzing. But I think if people have been in a budgeting process and they have budgeted an IT tool and an IT tool that needs maintenance or enhancements on a year-over-year basis, I think if you take a step back and then look at it from that perspective, some of that anxiety or trepidation will come away, and you can look at it from that perspective.
Thank you. Adam and Jeremy, if you don't mind, I think I'm going to skip you on this one because I'm looking at our clock and we've got a few more questions to go, and I'm hoping to turn it over for questions maybe around 1:15. Anything that you just need to take it off mute to say, because I certainly would welcome that, but want to see if we can get in all the questions. You guys are good? Great, great, fantastic. Thanks, Rachel. So we've been talking a lot about AI use for internal purposes, but I also want to start thinking about whether we might need AI tools to play defense. So, Adam, can you help us better understand how DOJ, the Department of Justice, has already started deploying these tools and what we need to be thinking about on our side? And Jake, I couldn't help but notice that it sounds like you used to be with the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. And if you have anything to share, we'd love your insights as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think DOJ is the one that has probably gotten the most press attention where, they're really looking at payments and, they're really using that data and AI tools to identify, potential kickback issues, potential false claims issues. I think that's pretty well known in the market. What I would tell is every single government agency out there is implementing AI in a way to better police its market. And one of the things that we really should understand as companies operating in this space, if our regulators are using AI to be more efficient in how they regulate us, we should really understand what those tools are. And the nice part about it is all of this is public. So every agency has some sort of roadmap document that is public that you can see the tools that they're developing in order to better regulate, our products. So DOJ does a great job. I mean, they moved from the analytics, 10 years ago to now using AI and really proactively trying to find, those payment anomalies in order to bring cases. They're also doing it when you're in litigation with them, they're also using it for extrapolation, all of those types of things that hopefully none of us ever get involved in. That's stuff that, the agencies are now utilizing the technology that is available to all of us. And as companies that are operating in this space, we really need to understand what that enforcement looks like so that we can build, appropriate compliance mechanisms to deal with that oversight.
Jake?
So Adam's exactly right that it's a real focal point for DOJ. I'd say though, I think that it's a little bit less when you think about what DOJ is actually doing, I think should be a little bit less intimidating than maybe some aspects of how AI is utilized. And back when I was at DOJ, I started a data mining working group and focused on bringing folks together from FBI, from HHS, from our own office to go dive into data and try to analyze cases. And we're seeing groups like that now at offices around the country, as well as centralized data analysis out of DC, both from the criminal division and out of civil frauds. And so we're seeing it in a few places. Adam noted there's some effort to be generating investigations, though I think it is still worth noting the vast majority of DOJ cases still coming from key TAMs when we're talking about False Claims Act cases, whistleblowers, and self-disclosures when we're talking about FCPA. But DOJ is excited to be trying to generate cases. What that really amounts to, for the most part, is outlier analysis. And so looking at spending patterns in CMS data. When I say spending patterns, I mean noting that an entity or a provider is suddenly shooting up, and in one year they're billing a lot more than they were billing the year before in a procedure or those sort of things, or they have a ratio of one procedure to another or one drug to another that is surprising. Interestingly, not only they're looking at CMS data here, thinking about the FCPA world, looking at foreign procurement data is something DOJ is increasingly doing. And again, we're really looking at outlier data and DOJ trying to just analyze, really thinking about just sorting data, looking at what the ratios are and saying, wait a minute, that doesn't make a lot of sense that one drug would be used at this proportion. Let's figure out why that's happening and that sort of thing. As Adam also noted, though, a lot of it is not just generating investigations, but looking at data to support investigations. I used to say by the end of my time at DOJ, the first call I would make when a key TAM came in or a tip came in was often no longer asking somebody to go interview a witness. It was more asking somebody to go pull data to figure out whether it is right, whether it actually, what somebody is saying holds up. And so we're seeing a lot of those efforts, both at the investigation stage and all the way up through trial and damages stages. But again, more of that is kind of broader data analytics than it is intense AI.
So interesting. You opened, Jake, by saying it's not that scary. That sounds really scary to those of us on the outside, at least from my perspective, the idea of DOJ and FBI working groups. So I think it's really interesting to surface that. I think it's really interesting also just your comment about how they're focusing on outliers, which of course suggests that internally pharma companies should be thinking about looking at their own data and asking themselves the question of whether they are outliers and if so, why. So really good points and thank you. Again, I'm looking at the time. You guys are fantastic. I want to make sure I get some of these important questions in. I'll also just say, we talked about DOJ. The FDA nerd in me feels compelled to say FDA is on top of this too. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that the Device Center launched a tool that's surveilling adverse events. The Drug Center is not far behind. What I've been telling my clients is if FDA is more aware of adverse events potentially associated with your products than you are, than we are, then we're going to be caught on our heels. And so suddenly, there didn't used to be incentive to, mine and capture as much data as we possibly can. But now I think that we have greater incentive there. We don't want to be caught on our heels. Another thing that just happened, I think last week, is FDA announced that they're deploying tools throughout the agency, throughout all centers, to assess applications. So NDAs, BLAs, PMAs, 510Ks, to make sure that there isn't dirty data. Of course, they're doing that. The Device Center's been doing that for, a year and a half now. They already sent a notice out over a year ago saying that they're finding more and more dirty data, particularly coming in from third-party labs in India and China. So now that the AI tools to review pharma and device applications are being thoroughly utilized within and throughout the agency, I think we should be expecting more of that. Again, suggest to us that we should be building our own tools. I know we're really pressing up against time. I do want to get some questions in, or make sure that we get some audience questions in. Let's just skip to the end here. I'd love all of you panelists to give some thoughts with regard to best practices for identifying and managing risks. Jeremy, you want to start us off? Maybe
Sure. So I point folks to, and yes, and there absolutely are a number of different types of frameworks and methodologies out there. One of the ones which, I found to be most impactful and frankly, most transparent, and comprehensive rather, is the NIST framework, so the NIST risk management framework, RMF. It is available online and it provides a really nice sort of 4-part structure with key questions for organizations to be considering. And so we talked a lot this afternoon around how one gets started, how one weaves governance in. I'd point folks to that framework in that it gives you a nice sort of set of guidelines around, well, okay, as I'm standing up a governance program, what type of questions should I be asking? And then again, there are certainly, I'd say, similar types of frameworks out there. Some commercial, some not in other parts of the world, and so on. But particularly, I found this to be a really good compass, if you will, for the journey.
Terrific. Adam, do you want to go next?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Jeremy on the NIST RMF. That is a government agency. So you do have some authority there and you have something you can lean back on in the absence of regulation. I think everybody on the call realizes that right now there isn't a lot of regulation of AI. We had an executive order from Biden that was pulled back. The Trump administration has indicated that they will be publishing an AI executive order, which will then trigger the agencies to put out rules in the near future. But in the absence of that law, the NIST RMF is really what we recommend to our clients. The thing, I'm going to go a little bit away from governance here and talk about data. And one of the things that companies really need to be clear on as they're developing these technologies is you really have to understand your rights to data. So to the extent that you are developing AI algorithms, you need to understand the data that is going into those algorithms and making sure that you have the ownership rights for that data. Similarly, if you're engaging third-party vendors, a lot of the pitches that we see in the market right now are, we have this comprehensive set of data that we can use, we can bring it into your environment, that will allow us to very quickly and rapidly deploy and scale these products. Understand if that is true, understand what those vendors' rights to that data are, and also understand how your data may be used by third parties. When you're entering into these contracts, data is oil, right? This is the value in this new AI economy. Understand how your data is getting spread around. We hold our trade secrets really close. One of the things that we're seeing sort of over and over and over again in this new market as people are accelerating into AI technologies is the same protections around that data that we've held for years and years and decades is not necessarily holding as we're rushing to develop these new technologies. So data rights is the number one area that, governance, you need it. You need to make sure the algorithm is sound. You have to make sure there's not bias. You have to make sure all of those checks are in place, but understand your underlying data before you enter into any of these projects.
Great.
That's my
Thank you.
soapbox.
Great. Thank you, Adam. Rachel, parting words for us, thoughts with regard to mitigating risks in this space?
I agree with what Jacob and Adam said, and I would say don't lose sight of the regulations that you have been complying with. You still have to prove out and be compliant with what you've been complying with for the past 5, 10, 15 years. Just because there's a cool new tool on the block that can give you really great insights. Those regulations haven't gone away. And if you get great new data, you still need to be proving out on the other side how you're still compliant. So I would say not to forget those pieces. Make sure you own the data, like they said, but also from a data privacy perspective and go through, tick all the boxes like you would in any other project.
Great, terrific. And Jake?
I just want to highlight for a moment as I wrap up what from DOJ's perspective is optional versus not when it comes to this stuff. Until recently, DOJ had not been pushing folks to be necessarily doing this, and instead the focus was only on making sure folks in compliance have access to data and can have it if they wanted to do their jobs. That's now not the case. In the most recent update to the evaluation of corporate compliance program, DOJ added this concept of proportionality, which really relates back to what my co-panelists were saying about all various other places within the entity where AI and these tools may be being used, because DOJ is essentially saying, look, you don't necessarily have to be using AI, but if you are not using it for compliance and those things, and for legal, because you're saying you don't have the resources, don't have those capabilities, don't have those budget, better not be using it on the business side. And so, and that's part of that is, well, you should care about both. You should have proportionality, but part of it's what my co-panelists were saying, that you can share those resources, right? If you're building that out, you should be building it out together and be using them there as well. So this concept of proportionality is key there.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. We've seen that concept on paper, of course, and we've seen that play out in a lot of the investigations that the firm is handling too, that if you're going to be using it on the sales and marketing side, for example, you sure as well better be using it on the compliance side as well. We skipped over that question. I can't help myself Adam, did you have anything that you wanted to add there just about particular areas of focus by the
No.
DOJ and
You know,
what the
I
compliance
think
guidance
Jake
is asking for?
I think Jake did a great job. It is that
Okay,
proportionality piece. It's, there's two sides to the coin. If you're going to use this for productivity, you better use it for compliance. And that's not going away. I mean, that is a theme, whatever regulations, whatever directions are now going to come from the government. I think that's here to stay. And, as companies, you can't be all offense. You also have to have defense. So as you're getting into that budgeting, as you're getting into that planning, understand how compliance also fits into your productivity and your efficiency. So it all comes down to an AI strategy. And I think the DOJ memo fits neatly to it.
great. Thank you all. It looks like we've got about 5 questions in the chat box. I know I need to turn it over to BioNJ. Maybe we'll just take 2 quick questions and then turn it over. One I think is really easy to answer, so I'm going to start with that, and of course we'll follow up on all of the other questions. Are any of the panelists aware of companies using AI to identify false claims or off-label promotion activities by their competitors? I love that question. I'm aware of companies that are deploying tools to make sure that they themselves can't be accused of making off-label statements or engaging in off-label promotion. I'm not aware of anyone who's looking at their competitors that way, but I bet that would be a fairly straightforward tool to develop. Anyone else see anything there?
No, it's definitely happening though.
It's definitely happening. That's
Yes,
great.
agreed.
That's great. That's great. This is, I think, a really great question, perhaps that we haven't touched upon yet. We get some kudos here to the panel, great examples of how AI drives efficiency related to communication and policies for HCPs and KOLs. But what about smaller companies, maybe ones that are pre-market or pre-revenue? How can AI impact their operational and research areas? Any quick thoughts there?
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's efficiency all day long, especially as an early stage company where you're going to be a little bit more resource constrained. I think having AI and having the accessibility that technology allows you to build a far more streamlined process, whatever that is. You're sort of starting with the new technologies, creating a strategy around that, identifying ways that you can use technology to compete against those incumbent systems is what you should be doing as a startup. And it's a thing that will really allow you to compete moving forward.
Great. Any other thoughts? Okay, terrific. Now I'm going to do what I promised to do, which is turn it back over to BioNJ. Thank you so much for your time today. We've really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, Rachel, Jacob, Jeremy, and Adam. That was terrific. I truly learn so much in these sessions. I hope everyone else enjoyed the discussion. I will now hand it off to Mark and Sheetal, our co-chairs, to talk about the work of this group, what they have in mind moving forward. And so over to you guys.
Thanks a lot, Ian. And I just want to extend a thanks to Lisa and the entire panel. It was an amazing job. I think demystifying and providing a lot of clarity in this area around AI and also providing information. I think that obviously it's relevant for the legal compliance and regulatory functions, but I think ultimately very actionable in cases. And I think it was really good to ground it in a lot of practical applications for folks on the call to take away with them. So I just want to thank everyone for an outstanding discussion today. As far as the Legal Compliance and Regulatory Advisory Committee within BioNJ, I co-lead that with Sheetal, who will speak shortly as well. Just to remind everyone, if you're not aware of it, our mission is really to foster education, communication, and networking across the 3 functions, legal, compliance, and regulatory, and that are working within life sciences in New Jersey, in New Jersey specifically. And as you saw on display today, our members and guest speakers as well plan and deliver interactive and I think very informative forums such as this. And ultimately, we look for input from the team, from the collective community on those types of topics. So I don't want to steal any more thunder because Sheetal's going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of how we pursue and identify topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Mark. And really thank you to our speakers who have spent so much time and energy and very thoughtful approach and making sure that the content was meaningful for everyone that joined today. So first and foremost, again, echoing that, thank you. I agree. I think now is the time more than ever to be able to build that external community in partnership with BioNJ, who has allowed us to have this forum where we can host interactive meetings, as well as making sure that the topics that we choose are meaningful to you. And so if you are not a member, or if your company has not engaged, we do encourage you to do so. Those that are in New Jersey are very much welcome to join us. We also encourage topics. This topic was a topic that was actually brought forward by one of our committee members. And so we're absolutely thrilled to support it, facilitate it, and do what it takes to bring the experts together, so that way you have information at your fingertips to make informed decisions within your companies. And so with that, we do, again, want to encourage you to continue to join us. The more people that join, the more programming we can provide to each of you. And again, big thank you today to our speakers. It went so fast, and I have a whole page of notes, which actually was a benefit to me. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ian.
Yeah, Ian, just real quick, I just want to take a quick second just to extend a thanks to you, Debbie, and the entire BioNJ team to really help, obviously on an ongoing basis, to make this happen, and definitely with this specific program. Just everything ran so smoothly. So just thanks, everyone.
Well said, Mark.
Well, thanks to you, Mark and Sheetal, and everybody for attending. We all hope to see you at a future BioNJ event. And just to be clear, you don't have to be in New Jersey to be a BioNJ member. You are welcome to attend, to join. And for a full, details of our full calendar and stuff like that, you can go to bionj.org. And just to close out, if you aren't a BioNJ member yet, please contact Sherry or Danielle. Both are on the participants list, I believe, still, as well, to learn about the many benefits of membership. And you can see their contact information up there on the screen. But before you sign off, please take a second to scan the QR code on the screen to take our short program evaluation form. Your feedback is very important to us. We take it very seriously. Take it from me. And thanks again for joining us this afternoon, and have a lovely rest of your Tuesday.